Go ahead, Penelope.
Great, thank you, Karen. Well, welcome everyone to the last session of the day. We've had some really wonderful presentations earlier, and now we're going to get ready for Friday night. We're going to talk about food and drink in Alaska. And our first presentation is Yoko Kugo and her co-conspirators. And then we are going to, and she is talking about food life history in Arctic communities, usages of underground cache and food preservation practices. And then we're having our special treat. Leading us off on the cocktail hour will be Doug Vandegraft, and he is going to give us a presentation on Bars of Alaska's Past, Gone but Forever Notorious. I'm assuming we're going to talk about the elbow room too. But anyway, I'm going to keep my comments really short here. I'm going to go ahead and defer to Yoko Kugo to introduce her co-conspirators on food life history in Arctic communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Penelope, for the introduction, and thank you so much for having us in this session today. My name is Yoko Kugo. I'm affiliated with Arctic Northern Studies at UF. I'm also teaching at UAA this semester. We have six co-authors for this paper. Kazuyuki Saito, he is a physical climatologist and affiliate professor at the Research Institute for Humanities and Nature. Dr. Mike Koskey, he's associate professor with the Center for Cross-Cultural Studies at UAF. The third, Hirasawa, he's an archaeologist. He's a lecturer at the University of East Asia. And Go Iwahana, he's a permafrost researcher at IARC at UAF. And Shirow Tatsuzawa, he's an ecologist. He's a professor at Hokkaido University. So we have six presenters, co-authors. Then the first three, we are the one we are going to present. Me and Kazuyuki and Mike. So this paper presents the theme of food life history, the history of harvest, preservation, and the preparation of local fish, meat, and plants in northern Alaskan communities. Indigenous peoples of Alaska rely on harvesting local, seasonally available food, such as freshwater fish, salmon, birds, land, and marine animals. They have affirmed and reinforced their culture ethics and local knowledge by telling oral traditions and participating in daily practices and harvesting and sharing those foods in respectful ways. The study of food life history relates to food security, ethnohistory, and life ways. Before we continue our talk, we'd like to acknowledge the collaborator communities for this presentation. Community of Anaktubuk Pass, which is on the picture on the slide today, and Sabunga and Gamble on St. Lawrence Island, and their local assistants. We do not learn from local voices about the underground meat sellers or secular work without their support, so thank you. The Research Institute for Humanity and Nature funded the project, which is from Japan. We began the project in spring 2020, working with our collaborating scholars and the communities in Siberia, Japan, and Alaska to conduct similar studies. So here's a food life history. We define food life history as a cycle of harvesting food, fishing, hunting, and plant gathering, processing and preserving food, and the transportation, distribution, and consumption of food. Each region has developed its own techniques to hunt animals and prepare the meat in their environment. Storing locally harvested meat in underground storage or ice cellar was practiced among the Arctic and the subarctic communities residents for at least 3 reasons. One is storing a mass of meat support the food needs of community residents. Quickly storing meat in the cellar helps meat from spoiling. And some meat processing and storage techniques require skills such as to achieve meat fermentation. And these photos are example of underground caches in Arctic. The Nunamir of an octopus on the left side of the two pictures, they used at least 3 community ice cellars until about 1980s. They storing food in 3 each cellars, one for caribou only, and the second one for marine mammals, and the other one for crow or other terrestrial animals. On the right side, Siberian Yupik Islanders people, they have used the meat cellars or sekluak, or the plural form for sekluak, for mostly storing walrus meatballs. Since the late 20th century, many indigenous communities in the Arctic have experienced climate change and culture change that have weakened their traditional life ways. Their food storage practices have changed due to rapid environmental fluctuations, especially in freeze and thaw and moisture conditions, and the arrival of modern education and technologies. Today, we will introduce interdisciplinary approaches, collaboration with weather scientists, social scientists, and community research assistants to learn about food life history and the use of meat ice cellars from various perspectives. We start with Dr. Kazuyuki Saito about climate conditions in the Arctic, and then literature reviews of seasonal cycle and the preliminary findings from our previous community visit to Sabunga and Gambu. Next slide, then.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you. So in the following 2 slides, we'd like to show some background information on climate change in the Arctic in the recent decades. The Arctic on northern high latitudes has been warming at a higher speed than in the rest of the world. The blue line here shows the Arctic temperature trends, while the red one, the global average. So the Arctic is about twice faster in speed of warming. And this warming exerts impact on the various aspects of the Arctic nature, as hydrological intensification in the atmosphere, sea ice retreat in the ocean, and permafrost thawing in the land areas. Next slide, please. The Arctic land is warming and wetting. So permafrost temperature has been warming or increasing both in Siberian side and Alaskan side as well. So for example, 3 arrows showing pointing the sites like 1113 or 55 or 1710 shows the sites in Alaska in Siberia as shown there. And please next step. Yes, and also the increasing trend has been found in Alaska too, from Northrop down to Gulkana, shown by yellow line, yellow arrow. And hydrological cycle has also been intensified as seen by increase in precipitation. It is the upper panel showing the maps looking at from the North Pole. And the precipitation, precipitation increase is apparent in summer especially, and also river flow or river discharge has shown some increasing trend flowing into the Arctic Ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next, back to social science perspective. The English translation of Sibukak, St. Lawrence Island, is squeezed out dry. According to several sources, after the Creator created the Earth and the two continents, Alaska and Siberia, he took a piece of Earth from under the sea, squeezed it out, and placed it between these continents. Carol Joris explains geologist account of land formation also. During the last ice age, 12,000 to 15,000 years ago, the land was integrated into the Bering Land Bridge. By 6,000 years ago, as the ice melted and water rose, the grave rock and tundra terrain of the island took shape, which is similar to what the islanders remember. The island was squeezed out from the sea. And this is a picture of Gamble from top of the Mount Sebukak. Charles Hughes observed that the foraging year of islanders might have begun in fall, that's is on the left bottom, whereas Joris perceives that it began in July after the whale festival. This figure presents seasonal harvest cycle of St. Lawrence Island. They seasonally hunted for various marine mammals, migratory birds, and plants. When I asked a local lady in Gamble when the least busy season of the year is, she said, we have a hunting season year round. So there's always hunting, always busy. In spring, after the ice breakup, hunters seek walrus, whales, and fur seals. By early June, numerous migratory birds return to their native rock. Walrus, whale, and fur seal hunting ends about June, and the main herd of walrus was passed to the north. The people also prepared a spring catch of walrus meat and walrus meatballs for storage in June, and then moved to the summer. It's on the green side. July and August are the busiest time of the year. They dry meat, hunt spotted seal in a lagoon, and go fishing and bird hunting using nets and guns. In late summer and through the fall time, people harvest various greens, root, tubers, and berries as the ground becomes frozen. They hunt for ducks, geese, and seagulls on the land, and hunt for spotted seals on the coast. Fall is also a season for walrus hunting until they travel to the south. In the winter, hunters harvest fur seals on the ice. Some people hunt the birds. And they go up on the winter, up then scorpion. January through May are the most months for scorpion fishing and crabbing. Walrus meat is a staple food among the people of St. Lawrence Islanders. Spring is a major walrus hunting season. According to one of Joris' respondents, hunters usually hunted 4 walrus and never killed more than what was needed and never wasted from the catch. They tried to make 100 duktak meatballs. So meatball, one is duktak and duktat is a pearl to store in the meat cache during the spring season for people and dog food. After the people brought duktak to their house and prepared for eating, cutting into pieces like you see on the bottom of this picture. Now they call it ikpak. So those are 2 pictures from Sikuruak, the one on the left, they're from Sabunga, and on the right side from Yambu. They built Sikuruak with walrus and whalebone, which were used for pillars and sailing, and large rocks were used for support on the side of Sikuruak. You see on these pictures. The entrance was constructed with wood and put the rock on the top of the lid, keep the lid closed, like you see on these pictures. And on the left side, they also had the the ceiling or the lid on top of the sickle rock. Hughes, Joris, and other scholars wrote about life race or subsistence lifestyle of the St. Lawrence Islanders. In the 1950s, the Hughes discovered changes in the food consumption due to social culture changes, and the young people began disliking some of those traditional food. Yamin Pasternak and her co-authors write about the taste and the smells of food, such as meatballs, and the cultural changes in Bering Strait. Hughes, Joris, and Crowell and his co-authors write about sharing food with communities and animals in ethical way is a core of cultural values among the St. Lawrence Islanders. However, they wrote little about how the people maintain the sickle rot and how they processed, fermented, and preserved the walrus meat properly. The other the scientists, Huntington and other write about the islanders' observations of climate change. Nevertheless, the islanders' concern of continuing to use the sickle rot due to permafrost thawing has really been discussed in the literature. Oh. Sorry. So this is the picture from this last month. Dr. Koskey and I traveled to Sabunga and Gambell in September 2021. Our goals of the trip were to hear and observe local concerns of maintaining sickle rot by hosting a community meeting to get to know residents so they come to know us and the project, and continue to work collaboratively to learn permafrost conditions and local observation of the landscape and continued use of sickle rot. From literature reviews and the previous conversation with local leaders over the phone, we could not identify how many sickle rot or meat sellers the community used in 2021. After we arrived in the communities, local government leaders assisted us in finding local assistants who are knowledgeable about the communities. And we were able to observe at least one sickle rock that currently is used in Sabunga and Gambell, as I previously showed on the slide. And we came across a few other sickle rot when we were on a four-wheeler ride in both communities. According to local assistant and resident, those were perhaps built in the early 1900s to 1940s. And from next slide, Mike is going to talk about the preliminary findings.
Thank you, Yoko. So I'll start with the time that we started seeing the change, and what we started to realize when we were on St. Lawrence Island is that most people felt that the use of the sickle became less common starting about the 1980s. And so we think that this occurred for a few reasons, and we're still trying to understand it in the different communities that we're working in. Beginning about the 1960s, electric freezers became increasingly available alongside the production and access to electricity. This happened a little bit later in some places, and that includes here on St. Lawrence Island. Also by the 1980s, the first noticeable and really undeniable landscape changes were being noted due to the gradual thawing and lack of refreezing of permafrost and ice wedges. And some of the people who we spoke to recalled, again, noticing these first changes in a way that seemed to be more or less permanent beginning in the 1980s. One person that I spoke to said that he had noticed these changes even before that in the 1970s, but didn't expect them to be permanent. They also noted the changes in the landforms, especially on the surface, and especially as this movement, this thawing caused buildings to lean and subterranean storage facilities to flood. And not only would they sometimes flood as the permafrost thawed, but they would shift, and sometimes the structure itself would be compromised. Well, in fact, the unstable temperatures and the changing precipitation has also led to changes in the taste of the meat that's stored underground, because this affects the fermentation process. Although what we had when we were there still tasted very good, but according to what people told us, it used to taste different. As one example of the changing landforms, it was explained to us how on the peninsula, which is kind of a gravel spit that Gamble is built near, the water used to run from essentially the northwest side of the peninsula to the northeast side as storms would come in, and it would carry gravel under the water around the edge of that spit. But then the natural current would draw it back, and it enabled the landform to be stable. This is no longer happening because there's multiple storms in a season now, and it doesn't give a chance for the current to bring that gravel back around. And so the spit itself is kind of shifting from a northwesterly point to a more northeasterly point, just as an example. So in Savunga, it was reported that one of the reasons that people have stopped using the cycloat is because of increasing instances of theft in the community of these. These aren't locked up or anything like this. As Yoko said, they're just covered with a board and a rock to prevent wind or animals from getting in. And unfortunately, when this is added to the other climate change factors, it's dissuading more people from maintaining their cycloat or building new ones. So as a result of these changes, fewer youth are learning about the construction and the maintenance and the use of these cycloat, as well as the fermentation, which itself is a skill associated with the use of the cycloat. But it was reported that some youth, and really I think that these are also by their actions and so forth, likely some of the future leaders of the communities, are interested in learning these old traditions, but changing them to meet current and future climatological changes and conditions. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so really what we see is the recent preliminary research in Anaktuvik Pass, Gamble, and Savunga has helped us to understand how to address our goals. And these were initial sorts of meetings, like Yoko said, to meet the community, to hold community meetings, to get some chances to see the cycloat and to talk with people about it. We intend, of course, to return to do more in-depth study, both from the climatological and the cultural sides. So our goals are listed here on the slide, and I'll just kind of talk about each one of them briefly, because I think we're down to about 5 minutes of presentation time. So I'll move through these fairly quickly. The first is to provide each community a comprehensive record of the food life history for the foods that are stored in the underground caches. And of course, we're looking at this in the past and the present, and we're hoping that this will lead to a more effectively locally based planning for food security needs. In particular, understanding how and at what rate these are excavations are, these cycloat are changing. We're hoping to be able to add recommendations to address the food security needs in the future. As you can see with the second goal, we hope to utilize with local assistance and oversight local knowledge, local traditional indigenous knowledge, which includes, of course, ecological, cultural, and cosmological knowledge traditions to accurately inform our understanding of the local food cycle and the local food history. And of course, we're there to learn from the local community, and we recognize that the elders and other tradition bearers in the community will be able to help us to understand this. And in our first trip, which was, I think, only about 2 weeks ago, we learned a lot more than we thought we would, I think, in the initial trip. And so again, the idea here is to help to contribute to effective strategic planning for food security. And so with these food security plans and strategies, We hope that communities can be responsive, more quickly responsive to food cycle changes, and be able to achieve a threshold for abundance as concerns food, its collection, its processing and storing, its life history, and so on. So one of the other goals of the project is to identify an underground cache site. We would want to, there are plenty of them, a pre-1960s site, because this is when electric refrigeration first starts coming into communities, for future excavation. And this would be in a separate project, a follow-up project, to better understand the construction functions and capacities. And as you can see with what's written there under that one, we hope that this will help us to gain a better understanding of how they're used, what the meaning of their use is, because that is an important part of it, as well as the specifics of the construction and the climate change effects of these underground caches. We're doing this, we plan to do this to enable more accurate analysis. We also hope to compare the physical qualities of the underground storage caches between the communities, not only here in Alaska, but between Alaska and Siberia as well. And then, of course, what we're looking for too is to be able to, through this comparative data, to be able to understand how different people in different places who are facing some of the same concerns are reckoning with these challenges. And it was one of the things that the people in the communities that who we talked to on St. Lawrence Island were really interested in, knowing what other communities were doing who are facing these same challenges. And so, looking at these qualities, we hope we can understand the fundamental conditions of the change and what the effects are socially and culturally on with the society. And I see I have a typo in the word develop here on the last one, on the capital P, but we're hoping to work with the community to provide mitigation or prevent effects of warming in new constructions, because they did express interest in finding ways and, of course, places to construct new cycloat. And this might include the modification of existing ice cellars, but the goal, of course, is working together with communities for us to understand what's going on and for the community to be able to achieve the goal of improving food security and therefore food sovereignty. Thank you.
So this is, I guess, this is the last slide of this presentation. So our project team with the colleagues from Siberia, Japan, and Alaska, we plan to have a second workshop. We had this food life history of the North workshop last year to share the knowledge, share the thoughts from locals, observation of the climate change, ice cellars, and we plan to have this on Zoom on October 26th and 27th, and it's free. And if you are interested in, please send me email, then I will send you the link. We don't have one yet, but we are working on the progress for the schedule. So thank you so much. And if you have any question, maybe I think after Doug's presentation, we will take.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Yoko, and your colleagues. That was fascinating. I think if Karen has no objection, we're going to go ahead with question and answer now, because the topic is so I think so fascinating that we should go ahead. If people have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll be able to read them. And I'll go ahead and start here. One of the questions that we have is, were you able to gain much information on the role of fermented fish eggs, and fermented meats in the traditional diet, and how that may have changed?
Yes, I should go ahead.
Did I go ahead?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, very interesting question, but I'll speak to the two communities on St. Lawrence Island, and maybe Yoko should respond regarding the Anaktuvik Pass response. But most of the fermentation involved the fermentation of what Yoko had called walrus meatballs, and it's not what you might think, a little, ball. I don't know if I can be seen, but about the size of a golf ball or something. But we're talking about a chunk of meat that's about the size of a basketball, or even a little bit larger. And yeah, and you're going back to that there. You can see one in the bottom left picture there, down in the Sikloap. And this is fermented. We were told anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And then, and of course, the fermenting itself is a skill that not everyone possesses. And then it's extracted. The outer bits are cut off and usually fed to dogs, and the rest of it becomes a delicacy, and quite a nice one as well. They don't store fish in these cellars. They are primarily for storing walrus meat, to a lesser degree, and in more former times, whale meat. One of the things that we didn't say here is that there is more of a tendency today, as people are moving away from these, to instead use racks for drying meat up against the house, and then a nearby box for storing that meat, or even storing the meat initially there before that meat is then put into a sikloak. And so, but the fermentation of fish was not really a part of the conversations that we had on St. Lawrence Island. But Yoko, maybe you have other information about Anaktuvik Pass.
Oh, I think so. The fermentation of fish, I have heard, and my friends make it in Yukon River area. So as Iliamna Lake area, they traditionally make a fish head, fermented fish head and eggs. But the ways we observe, we study in Sikuluak and ice cellars, we haven't heard about the fermentation of fish in both Sebunga Gamble and Anaktuvik Pass. So yeah, we planned to do the study in Iliam Lake area, and they told us about the fermentation of fish. They use a pit instead of digging a big hole, or like this construction of ice cellar. I think that's a different process and probably different season too.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Yoko, another question from Ron Inoue. He says, have you and the panelists seen cheese sakibara's whale snow in Nubia climate change and multi-species resilience in Arctic Alaska? He says Che teaches at Oberlin College.
Oh, that's a very good comment. I will look forward to it. I don't know.
Interesting. That sounds interesting too.
Okay. Yes, I know. I know. I think this year. Yeah, I will look for it. Thank you.
Okay. If you have any other questions, we have time for at least one more question. I might make a comment here. In the 1980s, I traveled to the Pribilof Islands. And while I was up there, I was treated to a delicacy that was called stinky seal flippers. And what it was seal flippers that had been buried in the ground and fermented, as you said, and then eaten. And they were such a delicacy that they were sent and swapped in the Aleutian Islands from Unalaska and Akutan. They would send salmon, and the people in the Pribilofs would send stinky seal flippers. So that's my story about fermentation.
Oh, nice. I know Iliamna Lake area, they used to do that too. I'm sure there are other communities in subarctic area, they have done it. and they probably still do it. I just haven't seen. Yeah, I think we have to be a certain season to be there. Maybe we have better chance to participate in. So this was for even last month, we were surprised to try this duktak or ikwak. We heard about it. I read about it, but I didn't think of it like I was able to see it and taste it. And that was wonderful.
This is
It really
Karen.
was.
This is Karen. There is another question, but I was just going to make another
Yes.
comment that in Utqiagvik, there are similar issues with permafrost melting and the effects on ice cellars. As a whaling community like Gamble, those ice cellars are incredibly important. It's where all the whale gets stored, and the whale has to be treated properly for it to give itself to a whaling crew. And some of those same things you're talking about, the fermentation, there are many foods up there that go through that fermentation, and seal flipper and mikiak, and not necessarily in the ice cellar, but it has to be done just right, and it can be very dangerous if it is not. So Rachel Mason had a question. Can you talk about any fermentation practices for meat or fish used in prehistoric Japan?
We, with Japanese colleagues, we looked for any sources in the literature. If I remember correctly, if I'm not saying it correct, maybe you can correct me, Kazuyuki. I think we didn't really find it. Is that right? Fermentation practices, even in Ainu cultures.
Yes. So we tried to find some practices, examples, or some literature notation about the fermentation practices with cold storage facilities. We couldn't find such, but as you may know, this is in historical time with the literature descriptions, we have fermentation practices with mainly with or for fish in Japan in general. But so if you are asking about the prehistoric information, we don't have no examples or no sources yet.
Okay, thank you. Karen, do you see any other questions?
No, the only thing is that your colleague Shirow is on, and if they would like to say anything, I can allow them to do that. Is there something you'd like them to add? Yoko? Do you want me to, does Shirow have something to add?
Oh, I can't see.
I can allow them to.
Oh,
talk.
yes, if he's around.
Okay.
Yeah, he's one of the colleague from Hokkaido University. He's an ecologist. His focus is in Siberia communities.
He just went away. I gave him
Oh.
permission to talk, and now he went away.
Well, it might
Oh,
come
okay.
back.
Okay, sorry. All right, that's it for the. Oh, he says he cannot use his mic. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So that's it
Hey.
for questions for now.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you so much for that really interesting perspective on what's going on in the permafrost up there and the uses of the food. And I liked your perspective of food history, how it's hunted and gathered and preserved and used. That was really good. Well, now we're going to move on to the cocktail section of our portion this afternoon. And Doug, why don't you go ahead and start telling us about the bars of Alaska's past, gone but forever notorious. You might want to unmute, Doug.
You got to unmute me. Thank you and welcome. Good afternoon, good evening. This has become my traditional time slot where I give a presentation about bars, and then we have an hour or so before the banquet, and then an hour or so or two after that, then we go on a bar tour. So I'm looking forward to doing that again, hoping that happens next year. In case you didn't know, I lived in Alaska from 1983 to 2000. I currently live in Washington State. And I realized the uniqueness of Alaskan bars. I got sent all over the state because I'm a cartographer, retired cartographer, and decided to write a book about the bars I had seen in Alaska. And it took me about 14 years researching it and writing it from Washington, DC, actually. First edition came out in 2014, second edition came out in 2017. As part of my book, I put together a website, and one of the pages is called Gone But Forever Notorious, and then I divided it into certain sections of the state. I had originally hoped, to have a whole section of the book devoted to bars that aren't, in existence anymore, places that people still talk about, but my publisher said there's not enough room. Oh, and by the way, we don't have room for your bibliography either. But there was this place on my website where people could talk to me, ask me questions, and it was amazing. A lot of questions I still get, is from people, wondering what happened at this bar, where was this particular bar located, and questions like that. And so I was looking at an Alaska magazine one day, and they did a little blurb about the Wyatt Earp's bar in Nome. I said, that's not right. No. And so I wrote the editor. I said, no, this is actually what you were trying to say. This is the actual fact. And she said, wow, thank you very much. This is really interesting. I looked at your website. Hey, would you mind writing an article for Alaska Magazine? Which I did. This came out in February 2020. And there it is, raise a glass, Alaska's notorious bars, and a toast to high spirits. He said, I'll give you 800 words. And that's not very much. And so I got to talk about 12, just a dozen bars out of the literally hundreds that I could have talked about that I have information on. And so this was not an easy task, trying to choose just 12 to talk about. But I did, and for better or for worse, these are the 12 that I came up with. The Forecastle in Ketchikan, 1934 to 2003. This bar was home to halibut fishermen and loggers who frequently brawled there. The bar was decorated in nautical style. And forecastle, the word forecastle refers to the bow of the ship, which is where the crew usually stayed. This was from 1934, saying that it opens tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. I never went to the forecastle. This must have been a really cool bar to go into. I would have liked to have gone. I wish I knew about it. And yeah, as time goes on, a lot of places in Ketchikan, a lot of old bars got replaced by what? Jewelry shops. And that's what that is. It is where it used to be the forecastle is now a jewelry shop. It's right next door to the Totem Bar, the brown building you see there, which is still in business. The Arctic Bar in Juneau, 1933 to 2014. There have been several Arctic bars in Alaska, but the one in Juneau is in a class by itself. This was one of the first bars to open after Prohibition ended in 1933. That's Joe McNallen there on the right, and he was the first owner. Interesting place, not very big. He was, according to this caption, he was selling tickets, I guess, to the ice pool here. It's known for sponsoring championship basketball teams, for its jukebox, which had an extremely eclectic variety of music, and for its toilets, believe it or not, which were made of cast iron steel. I took this picture in 2001, and it wasn't long after that it closed in 2007. But it was reincarnated as the Narrows, a high-end craft cocktail bar, which bears little or no resemblance to the original Arctic bar. Moe's Frontier Saloon in Skagway, 1937 to 2007. owned by Malcolm and Mary Moe. They advertised a lot in certain magazines. Color and romance await you at Moe's Frontier Bar, always with that liquor store connection. And yeah, apparently they said a deer wanted to have a beer. I like going to Moe's more so than the Red Onion. I have been there a couple times, and they had some really classic T-shirts, upside down letters that said, if you can read this, please put me back on my bar stool. It was, this picture was taken in 1993. It's kind of nearing its end. And this is one of the last pictures that was taken while it was still in business. Today, the building's been divided in half. And this picture showed the left half, which was where the original bar part was. And it was for rent when this picture was taken. Time marches on. Club Valdez, I never went to this bar either. It was from came into existence in 1950. That's prior to the 1964 earthquake. They advertised where the trail meets the sea, and you can get a good dinner there as well as a drink. As most of us know, Valdez was destroyed, the original town site in 1964 by the earthquake, but it was rebuilt. The Club Valdez was rebuilt in the new town site, new owners, and a whole new building and everything. Unfortunately, the Club Valdez is known to a lot of us as where Joseph Hazelwood had his last drink. He had been there in the Pipeline Club having double vodkas on the rocks for a while. Then he and some friends got a pizza to take back to the Exxon Valdez, but before going into the ship, they stopped for one last drink at Club Valdez. Then he promptly got on board, and within a few hours, 10 million gallons of oil was spilled into Prince William Sound. It's not a bar anymore. This picture was taken, it was a pizza parlor there in Valdez. The Birdhouse, gotta love the Birdhouse. This was on the Seward Highway in Indian. And this was from 1963 to 1996. And a really neat place. I hope anyone who ever been there will never forget it, strictly for the birds. Here's a really early picture of it. It was two cabins that were, matched together, put together. And the one on the left slanted down to the left, and the one on the right slanted down to the right. So literally, if you were sitting at the bar in the left side, you are sitting at like one of those stools that they had made of a stump. You had to hold on to your beer, otherwise it was going to go sliding down at the bar. You could cross a little bridge to get in there, and this is what it looked inside. It was a fire trap, fire waiting to happen, with all the bras and the panties and the $1 bills and all the business cards and everything. I couldn't resist. That little orange card up there, that's my Coconino County Library card from Flagstaff. I put that up there in 1983. And my friends and family followed suit. It became the Vandegraft corner right there. All this went up in flames, of course, in 1996. And that's about where that white trailer is on the right. That's about where it was. And but fear not, Chilkoot Charlie's in Anchorage built a replica, and it is pretty darn close to what the Birdhouse looked like. They must have had the blueprints or something. The big thing that's missing is the distinctive smell. If you remember going into the Birdhouse, there was that damp, kind of funky kind of smell. You can't put that in a bottle. So. But otherwise, going to the Birdhouse at Chilkoot's is pretty cool. The Monkey Wharf in Anchorage, 1976 to 87. This was the very first bar that my fiance at the time went to when we got into Anchorage in 1983. This was a unique bar. They had an aquarium behind the bar, big old long aquarium filled with little monkeys. Here it is, the building. And right there, kind of in the center, it's about where the National Park Service building is on 5th Avenue right now. Interesting place for sure. And those monkeys, they were cute, yeah, but they were disgusting as well. They did all kinds of nasty, vile things that highly amusing to some people, just downright gross to other people. Had their own house band and everything, but yeah, it's just one of those places that wasn't long for this world. And about there on the green, there, the grass on the right, where that big building is, that's the National Park Service building there on 5th Avenue, right across the street from Sullivan's. That's about where it was. Mr. Whitekey's Fly-By-Night Club in Anchorage, 1980 to 2006. Who can forget the shows? It wasn't about the bar, it was about the entertainment provided by Mr. Whitekey's. And he and his Spam Tones and the Christmas in Spenard and Whale Fat Follies, it was worth the money, it was worth it. I used to take everyone who had guests coming to town, we always went to Mr. Whitekey's to see the shows. It was really fun. And who could forget, you know, Sourdough Mike singing the Alaska's flag song, brings a tear to my eye. Or, of course, them leading everyone would go about this bar, Skinny Dick's bar, which is between Fairbanks and Anana, halfway. Skinny Dick's, halfway in. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. This is what the Fly-By-Night looks like now. I think there's a church that holds services there on Sunday. The Nevada in Fairbanks. There have been more than one Nevada bar in Fairbanks in this state. Nevada bar was a popular name for a bar in Alaska and in other states. This one also very cool. I was way before my time, 1938 to 1971. It was actually, the building was built in 1909. And they had a whole lot of old newspapers and old Alaska memorabilia all over the walls. It must have been really neat, like kind of walking into a museum. And the city of Fairbanks decided we need to start making way for newer and better buildings, more safe too. And so the Fairbanks City Council declared it unfit, and it was going to be torn down. And they tried to stop this. They put a bunch of false front and gallons of paint, failed to save the old Nevada bar in Fairbanks. And there were a whole lot of people that protested this, but it happened anyway. And the governors of Alaska and Nevada both sent letters of condolence. Today, it's about where the Key Bank building is, there on the south side of the Cushman Street Bridge on 1st Avenue. Tommy's Elbow Room. This is elbow room number 1 of my talk, 1946 to 2003, right on 2th Street. And also really cool place. I didn't go in there. It was owned by Tommy Paspan Jr. It wasn't like the other 2th Street bars. It was more for people, for students, professors, reporters, business people, and politicians, including Howard Rock, the editor of the Tundra Times, and I think a huge influence on getting ANCSA written and passed. He had his own table apparently, and I don't know if he had his typewriter, but he was known to hang out there. Tommy died in 1993, and it went through a succession of owners for a little while. They tried a cabaret, and there was a tap house there for a while, and even a dance studio, and it never really took. But today, there's the building, and the sign is still there. You're on 2nd Avenue. Beachcombers in Kodiak, 1944 to 1992. We were last in, our last conference was in Kodiak, and I talked a little bit about this when I was there at my talk. In 1944, it was a very popular place. The war was still going on. It was one of several places that the soldiers could go to. This one apparently had, like, Beachcombers had an orchestra. Here's what the original building used to look like. And like Valdez, the 64 earthquake had a terrible effect on that building. And so they literally towed the ship into the lake, a potato lake, and turned it into a bar, restaurant, hotel called the Beachcombers, and very popular with the Coast Guard, as well as just the normal people that were in there, the normal people that lived in Kodiak, fishermen, townspeople, and tourists. It started to decay too, and they started to look for a new home, and they did. They built a new building, which is now the Salvation Army. But you can still go out behind the Salvation Army building and see where the hull of the ship was. According to Tony Sullivan, this is the bow stem, but the entire hull is buried out there in the yard behind the Salvation Army building. Beachcombers, I guess, met in the building that became the Salvation Army for a little while, and then it just ceased becoming a bar. It's now just the Salvation Army. They had a reunion in 2017. I mean, this was how fond Kodiak was of this bar. The other elbow room, maybe possibly one of the most notorious bars in Alaska. This is in Unalaska. People could say it's in Dutch Harbor. It was really in the city of Unalaska, 1966 to 2005. It was originally the Blue Fox when it opened in 1942. It catered to a generation of crab fishermen and earned a reputation for being rough, tough, and rowdy. The fishermen, pockets full of $100 bills. They would buy drinks for everyone at the bar for the whole evening. Jimmy Buffett performed there in 1987. He was in Anchorage and he was writing a book. And someone said he needed to go out there, so he did. And the fishermen, boy, they made sure Mr. Buffett was comfortable. They lined the bar with beers and shots, just waiting. Yeah, I don't know how many, no human could possibly have consumed that much alcohol, but the fishermen sure made him feel welcome. It was, again, a really rough, tough place. I've been in the elbow room twice, and this scene had never happened to me, but apparently it definitely had a reputation of being rough and tough. It closed in 2005, and it became Latitudes for a while. And for a couple of years, and that didn't last either. And the building is still there, but it's no longer a bar. The Dexter, talked about this bar too when we were in Nome a few years ago. That's Front Street in Nome in 1900. There's the Dexter right there. It was owned by Wyatt Earp and his partner, Charlie Hoxie. This was the first two-story structure in the gold rush city of Nome. That's the real Wyatt Earp right there in 1900 on the beach in Nome, right there in the center. Matt is the real Josephine. People that have seen that movie Tombstone, teens seen the movie Wyatt Earp, Dana Delaney and Joanna Going have nothing on the real Josephine. Beautiful woman. Apparently she had a gambling problem though, and Wyatt had to try to keep her out of the Dexter. They made a lot of money on this bar. They left town after owning it for just 3 years, left town with $50,000, which was a fortune back then. It became it changed names, and then in 1934, all of downtown Nome went up in flames, and so the building is long gone. There are some mementos out there, at least some tokens you can find here and there. And the city of Nome put a sign up, and this is where the Dexter was. Our actual site of the Dexter was approximately 20 feet southeast of this sign. The road, the realignment of Front Street had a lot to do with that. You can read more about bars that are long gone on my website, and I'm easy to contact if you've got questions and everything. It has been so fascinating to me to be contacted by people. Recently, I was contacted by a former dancer in Anchorage. This place was called the Last Chance, and she gave me the only photo I have of the Last Chance Club. And this was before like the sleazy, the 70s and 80s, when it was just crazy strip clubs when I first moved there. This is when the dancers actually had costumes on. This lady, that's her on the far right. And anyway, it's a pleasure talking about this subject, and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Doug. That was another really wonderful presentation about one of the biggest pastimes in Alaska, which is going to the bar. Certainly appreciate it. And I'm sorry that we won't get to do the crawl this year, but we have high hopes for next year.
Yep.
And as Doug said, he has a website, and you can forward questions to him. Karen, do we have any questions now?
I don't see any. We lost everybody else. Let's see. Oh, there they are. Okay. There are no questions yet, but I thought that Doug, were you aware that Angie Schmidt on our board and her husband Chris own the Elbow Room building here in Fairbanks?
No, it's not surprising to me. She's been super helpful to me and providing me information about neon signs for old bars and Fairbanks and everything. But no, I did not know that. Very cool.
Yeah, and there is next door, there is the Lavelle's Tap House. So there is still.
The tap house is still there. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it would be interesting to think about, you say these bars come and go and what makes them last or not. And that with COVID, what's still going to be a functioning business and not, and how that would affect some of these establishments.
Yeah, we'll talk to Lael Morgan, my publisher, about that probably next year, and see how where all the dust settles and what bars survived and what bars didn't. Just where I live here in La Conner, Washington, the town got clobbered. There's several bars and several restaurants that are gone, not coming back. And I'm sure there are bars. I was just in Anchorage and in Juneau. It seemed like the bars that I remember are still there. I didn't do a final tally, but yeah, we'll be looking at that over the next couple of years. Assuming we'll do a third edition someday.
So Doug, we've got a couple of questions here. One is from Bob Hughes, and he wants to know if you've ever done anything about the salty dog in Homer.
It's in my book, you bet.
Do you want to say a few words about it?
Pardon me?
Do you want to say a few words about
it? It's my favorite place to go after I do or don't catch a halibut. I hope they never take down the skull that's nailed behind the bar to the wall. How they got away with that, I don't know. But last time I was there, it was still there.
Well, that's a wonderful memory, Doug. Thank you for sharing that. And we have another question. David Ramser asks, did bars in Alaska practice discrimination against Native and other minorities that you're aware of?
Oh, you bet. Absolutely. It wasn't real obvious like in the advertisements that I would find, but I have plenty of accounts of where bars with just natives not allowed, natives, that was just pretty standard stuff. Definitely in the 40s. Later on in the 50s and early 60s, it started going away. And by the 70s, I think it was, that kind of discrimination had stopped. But it was definitely alive and well in the 40s.
And Bruce Gazaway wonders if anyone has written a history of the various means used by Alaskans to avoid prohibition.
I talk about that, write about that. Alaska was unique in a lot of ways because of its proximity to Canada, which had no prohibition. And the lack of law enforcement made it extremely lucrative to import whiskey and other booze from Canada. And there's just lots of ways to make booze, make alcohol. And there were stills, particularly in the southeast of Alaska, that operated for years after Prohibition ended, that just continued to make alcohol because it was just a profitable business, and they wouldn't get caught.
True, true. And that's all the questions that I see. Karen, do you see any in Q&A?
Bruce Gazaway added, many feel most fox farms were fronts for alcohol production.
He's right. Bruce is right. You bet.
And then Athena says, by the way, my mom was second from the right versus the far right.
Athena, hi.
Gotcha.
Excellent. Thank you. I thought she was the one on the end. I'm sorry. 1,000 apologies.
All right. Well, that was really great, Doug. And thank you to you and to our earlier presenters. Food and drink in Alaska. And now it's time to go and have one.
I'm all for that. Thank you, Penelope.
All right, Doug. Take care.
See you later.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I think we will sign off a bit early, which is a nice treat. I'm going to stop the recording.